everybody, this is Josh from the Hayes Drive. Today I want to welcome Wendy Davis, a Democratic candidate for Texas's prized 21st Congressional District, currently held by Republican Chip Roy. Ms. Davis, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
It's good to see you. Let's just jump right in, because there is a lot going on right now in the world. There are many directions we're being pulled, from fires and hurricanes to election integrity and elections and everything going on. So what is keeping you motivated? What are you focusing on right now as you enter this home stretch of this election campaign?
I mean, everything you just said, Josh, it feels like there's so many crises going on around us everywhere we look. And none of that has to happen. It's not as though these things are happening without some help along the way, from the failure of leadership that we've seen at the national and state and in some instances local levels around this country. But for me, in this particular moment and in this community across Congressional District 21, which includes 10 counties, of course, runs from Travis County to Bexar County, and then west through the beautiful Texas Hill Country all the way out to Real County and Kerr County. Though the district is different in many ways,
Yes.
The folks that live in downtown Austin and the folks that live in Blanco, for example, may have different opportunities and challenges that are a part of their day-to-day lives. But we also share some very common threads. And one of those right now, of course, is the outfall of COVID and the mismanagement of that pandemic, both from a healthcare consequence and the thousands of people, 13,000 now, who have lost their lives in Texas. And of course, the many hundreds of thousands of Texans who are out of work as a consequence of how mishandled that particular issue has been.
Well, speaking of mismanagement and the consequences of that, I want to circle back a little bit. You are no stranger to a fight. You have been in some huge political fights in your career. You've, I believe, 2 filibusters that you kind of spearheaded while you were in the Texas Senate. One to, I believe you were fighting a bill that was going to defund public education by around $4 billion. But then you had your $5.4 billion of public education defunding. And then, of course, 2013, your famous filibuster on the Senate floor that kind of got you in the national spotlight. I believe you filibustered for around 11 hours while the Republicans tried everything they could to stop you. They even thought they got you for a little while, but with some technicalities, but you had some help from your colleagues and a pretty raucous crowd of supporters in the Capitol and the gallery to get you across that finish line. But your victory was kind of short-lived, because the next day Governor Perry just called another special session and that bill was passed. So I bring that up because lately it seems the GOP and the current administration are able to kind of sidestep every legal procedure and just flat out ignore it, including the consequences that come with it. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting to see as a voter. It's exhausting. And a lot of people feel hopeless about this. So being one who doesn't back down to a fight, how do you intend to stand up to this kind of reckless leadership if you were to win election in November?
So I think the very first thing that we have to do, and it was actually the very first action that the Democratic majority U.S. House took when they were seated a couple of years ago, they took head on money in politics, ethics in politics, and the voter suppression efforts that have taken root in states all over this country. And the essential nature of that can't be overstated. So the money in politics, we all know that after the Citizens United decision, money came flooding into politics in a way that we had never seen before. I had yesterday on my Facebook Live town hall the president and executive director of the organization End Citizens United. And one of the things that she was pointing out, just to give an example of money's influence in politics, the reason that we can't get prescription drug prices reduced is because Big Pharma has over 700 lobbyists who, on a full-time basis, are lobbying lawmakers on Capitol Hill. And when they flood their campaign accounts with enormous amounts of money, of course, they're going to have an influence that they ought not to have. So that bill, that first bill that the Democratic majority House passed, dealt with that, making sure that we're unwinding some of the influence of money in the outcome of political campaigns. The second thing that's really important about what they did is they rewrote the ethics rules and put in place some rules that are much tougher than we've ever had, appropriately so, so that we are able to shine transparency on the way that lawmakers are earning their money. For example, one of the things that they went after was the fact that right now lawmakers are allowed to serve on for-profit boards while they're in Congress. It just doesn't make any sense because clearly that's going to create a conflict. But finally, and I think as important as any of those things, is the issue of making sure that people can appropriately express their values at the ballot box. That's what our founders intended to be the case for us. And living in a state like Texas, we know that there has been a long-term, widespread effort to constrain access to the ballot. We know that gerrymandering has created districts that just don't make a whole lot of sense in terms of what people have in common each with the other. And they've been used in a way that dilutes the voices of voters so that representatives are picking their voters instead of the other way around. And I want to be a part of making sure that not only do we pass that bill again in this next convening of Congress, but that we've done everything we can to seat a Democratic Senate and a Democratic presidency so that it won't just land on the current leader of the Senate's desk to die, that this bill will go forward and really reset what's happening in national politics in a way that I think will give people more trust and confidence in the fact that lawmakers are there to do the work that they've sent them there to do.
Absolutely. And I think that gerrymandering has been a topic for a long time, but I don't think it gets enough public time. Yes, it's talked about from people running, it's talked about from people that are really involved, but I don't think a lot of people understand just how devastating it can be with voter suppression, with kind of making it impossible. Okay, well, if we can't win here, we'll just redraw the lines so that we can win and then avoid so many voters. So that is definitely an agenda that me personally I'm hoping is pushed. In regards to that, if you were to be elected, what other legislative items would you want to be high up on your agenda to push or to have a voice for?
Well, one of the things that I've always fought really hard for is public education. I come from a challenged background in that regard. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, had a 6th and 4th grade education between them. They were tenant farmers their entire lives. They had 14 children. And as you can imagine, they lived in extreme poverty. My mom, one of their children had only a 9th grade education. And when she and my dad got divorced when I was young, she became financially responsible for me and my 3 siblings on that 9th grade education. And I can tell you, it doesn't get you very far. And we really struggled. And then I, of course, was filled with the dream that I was going to break that generational cycle of undereducation and poverty. And at 18, found that the universe had a different plan in order for me. I found out I was expecting. I had my daughter Amber when I was 19. and became a single parent very shortly after that. And I struggled in poverty. And the only thing that helped me to break through that was the ability to access higher education. And the only way I was able to do that was because I had a community college where I could put my foot on that path. And I also had leaders who had come before me who believed that we ought to invest in people like me. So I started school on a Pell Grant. And that was really what broke open an opportunity for me. And, you know, everyone sees their opportunity differently, and everyone has different hopes and dreams for themselves. But I think one of the most important roles of government is to make sure that we're a partner. If you're willing to do that hard work, we are going to partner to help make sure that you can achieve it. It's just so foolhardy and so bad for the economy that we don't try to do everything we can to help people be a success. Because obviously, the better we each individually can do, the more we can contribute to the bottom line GDP of this country, the more spending we can put into the economy, the better we're all going to be. It's that simple, you know, but beautifully true statement. When we all do better, we all do better. And it's just so disappointing to me that we live in a country where there's still an effort to just hold people down, hold people back. And I want to be a partner in making sure that we correct that. So that's one of the most important things for me. But we also, as you know, live in a state where we have the highest percentage of uninsured people. Somewhere in the neighborhood of another million or more people were added to our uninsured rolls when they lost their jobs due to COVID. And as a consequence of that, the healthcare crisis here is having a greater impact than it ought to. You may have seen the headlines about San Antonio, Texas, having the highest death toll of any of our urban areas in the state. And the reason for that being that the uninsured population there is so high, and there are so many people who have underlying health conditions that have never been addressed, and it made them so much more vulnerable to this disease. So these decisions, and they are decisions that are made to keep people uninsured, actually have a real toll on real people who lose their lives and who leave behind them families that will grieve them forever. We've got to be smarter than that, because again, back to my first point, if we invest in people's health, we invest in our economy. And it just makes good sense. It just makes good sense for all of us to do that.
It does, absolutely. It's frustrating when the idea of helping people with education or helping people with healthcare is politicized and made into some kind of boogeyman or money draining aspect. When we're not talking about funding people to everybody go to expensive colleges, we're helping people with getting into the community college or trade schools, where are just as important as expensive colleges. And the idea of wanting to help people in that aspect, or the idea of wanting people not to be held down by employer-based healthcare, making that politicized is frustrating to see, because it is true. The more we help people, the better we are as a community. So as someone who has a mother who is a high school librarian, I very much appreciate that you want to bring up that cause and push that. But that does bring me to Congressional District 21, which is historically a Republican stronghold. However, I mean, there were years that Democrats didn't even run in it, but Chip Roy only won in 2018 by a few percentage points and I believe the voter turnout in 2018 was even higher than 2016, which is kind of unheard of. So with that being said, what kind of motivation are you hearing from your voters as you're in this? Because it seems that the motivation to vote this year, even in a pandemic, is higher than 2018, 2016. So what are you hearing from your voters?
I think that's true. First, I have to give props to Joseph Kopser. Joseph Kopser, of course, was our Democratic nominee for Congress in this district in 2018. And Joseph is really the one that proved to everyone that this is a district on the brink of turning blue. I don't think anyone believed that that was the case before Joseph stepped up, put himself on the line, and sacrificed all that time, energy, and effort to demonstrate to us that this is a winnable seat. And because of the work that he did, that caught the attention, of course, of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. We had so many congressional races in Texas that were really close last cycle that the DCCC set up shop here and has been investing and helping to make sure that we have the ground resources that we need, the communication support that we need to be able to successfully flip these seats. And mine isn't the only one that will very likely flip in this particular election. But they're going to flip not because we will deliver anything magical. Instead, it's because we're going to deliver to people an alternative to what they've been getting. And what they've been getting with people like Chip Roy, and very specifically with Chip Roy, is someone who's gone to Congress and not fought for their families, not fought to make sure that they have health care. In fact, he's fighting to tear the Affordable Care Act apart, not fighting to make sure they can have a secure retirement, because Chip Roy believes that we ought not have Medicare and Social Security and we ought to privatize that, not fighting to make sure that their kids can go to good public schools, because Chip Roy believes we ought to drain money out of our public schools and give it to private and parochial schools, not fighting in this instance, in this crisis, to make sure that they are going to come out of this as healthy and whole as possible. In March, he was arguing that we ought to just throw everything open wide, infect each other, literally calling for herd immunity infection when we don't have a vaccine, so that we could get the economy going again. And it's absurd, because though we've already lost about 13,000 souls in Texas, if he'd had his way, if he'd been in power, if he'd made this decision on his own, and thank goodness there were reasonable people on both sides of the aisle that stopped him from it, there's no telling what the death toll would be like right now. We just have to have more responsible people. And, you know, it's really, to me, also upsetting that this is a person who represents what we proudly call Military City, USA, San Antonio, Texas. And yet he was one of only 3 members of Congress who voted against tax relief for Gold Star families. One of only 3. Every other Republican, with the exception of 2 other members, voted to do this. He was the single member that blocked disaster relief funding that was intended to help people across the country who'd experienced hurricane and other natural disasters. $4.5 billion of that for Texas because of Hurricane Harvey. And then ultimately, after blocking the vote from being taken, when the vote finally was taken, he voted against it. That's not someone who is working for this district. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I think you want someone fighting for those things, because none of those ought to have a partisan ideology behind them. It makes good sense that we try to take care of each other. And that's what I hope to do. And I think it's providing that alternative that is really going to help us get this race across the finish line successfully.
Absolutely. And you were, I believe, a member of the Veterans Affairs and Military Installations Committee.
That's right.
I mean, we make it seem like it's a partisan issue. Republicans like veterans, but that's not the case. You fought very hard with that. Texas has a large veterans population. So yeah, their voice needs to be heard regardless of the political party. And it seems like you put that work in there. But I know I want to wrap it up, because I know that you have a very busy schedule. I mean, it's coming down to crunch time, so I don't want to keep your time. I want to thank you very much for coming out and joining this group's growing aspirations. It's very nice to hear from you. I wish you all the best of luck with this upcoming election, and I hope to see some good things out of you after November. So
Thank you, Josh. I can just tell all of your listeners, all of your viewers, that if I have the privilege of serving this community, I've always taken to heart that we represent every person in a community, not just the folks who voted for us. In 2008, I flipped a red state Senate seat blue. And when I was reelected in 2012, I did 7 points better at the polls than Obama did in that district. Romney won that district 7 points more, or 7 points over Obama. But I was reelected because I served the community, because I believe that every person deserves to have a fighter in their corner, and that we ought to set ideology aside and put our state and the people in our state first. And I just want to say, as closing words to your listeners, your viewers, that's the kind of service that you will get from me. And I would consider it an honor to be your congressperson, to be in communication with you, to learn from you, and to serve you as a servant leader ought to. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And from the Hayes Drive, we wish you best. Thank you for joining us out today. Thanks for everybody for listening. Have a good one.
Thanks, Josh.